we'd like to start by acknowledging that we're recording this episode of our podcast on the unceded sovereign lands of the Gadigal people and pay our respects to their elders past and present. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Hey, welcome to So You're Disabled.
I'm Soph, I'm disabled, and my pronouns are she, they.
I'm Tam, I'm living with a disability, and my pronouns are she, her.
Wow, episode 1.
This is so exciting. Oh my God, Soph and I have been speaking about starting something like this now for so long.
Yeah, and we're here.
Finally, this is so exciting.
And I guess the first thing we wanted to do was talk about where So You're Disabled comes from. How did it start? And where does the name come from? What does it mean?
Yeah, so, even before we started our Insta page, we were having all of these conversations about our shared experiences of disability and how often when you talk to someone about it, it's disability is inherently viewed as this very negative defect thing.
Yeah, and then you have these conversations with people either who you're just meeting for the first time or who you've known for a while but haven't talked to about your disability. And having that conversation for the first time, and in some way or another, some form of this conversation happens where they're like, oh, so you're disabled. And this really loaded question. And all that then comes with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I discovered very early on because I first started getting symptoms when I was 15. And so at that time, I was telling some people, and then I discovered just how badly people's responses were that not long after that, I literally just decided I was never going to tell anyone. And I did not speak about it with anyone until literally we started So You're Disabled. And so that's also why we wanted to start So You're Disabled, because at least in my experience, having a disability and, even accessing a diagnosis or trying to access it, it can be such an isolating experience. I just felt like I couldn't speak to anyone about it and no one understood me. And I mean, sure, you and I have been best friends since we were in year 3, not year 4. I thought it was year 4, but it's actually year 3. And
one of us is the better best friend.
I wonder which one that is. And, of course, could I have spoken to you about it? I mean, logistically, maybe not, because you had actually moved to Melbourne. But I wouldn't have spoken to you about it anyways, because I was so petrified of anyone viewing me differently and viewing me as all of a sudden not being a complete person anymore.
Honestly, it makes sense. When I think back to the first time you did tell me, I was very I was very confused because it kind of came up very suddenly.
In a cafe?
No, we were walking to the cafe.
Oh, were we?
Yeah.
I just remember it being in the cafe. It's funny how memory works.
Yeah. No, we were walking to the cafe and you said it very quickly, very suddenly. And then I was like, oh, okay. And I very much got the impression of you don't want me to ask questions about this. And so I was like, oh, okay, yeah, no worries. And then I was like, I definitely have follow-up questions, but I definitely don't think that this is the time to ask them. And I don't think that she wants me to ask them. So
well, thank you. That was very respectful.
No, but it makes sense now, thinking back to that moment.
But many people don't respond that way. So if many people respond with almost this weird intrusive sort of view of wanting to know all about your medical history, or other people, and this is the main reason I suppose as to why I don't tell anyone, is because all of a sudden I've gone from being viewed, because for me it's an invisible disability most of the time, so I'm being viewed as they're sort of equal, so to speak, right? And then I tell them, and then all of a sudden you just see all of this pity on their faces, and all of a sudden I'm just this inferior sort of person, where they then say things to me oh wow, we admire you so much, that must be so hard for you, you're so incredible, you're so inspirational.
Yeah.
And it's I'm just a person. How have I changed after 2 seconds?
Yeah. And I also my disabilities are invisible as well. And I have had this similar experience of first of all, not wanting to tell people. I got diagnosed when I was in my teenage years as well, in high school. And I think high school is honestly hard enough without
so rough.
Then having this big life-changing thing happen and this label put on you. And as an adult, I have really struggled with you know, this label and like how I identify and all of these things. So I can't even imagine as a teenager, like how you are meant to process all of that, especially when like there's no access to conversations, you know, kind of like this, where you can be like, well, how do I identify? And like, you know, like, what does that mean for me? And like outside of people's perceptions of you, what do you think about you? Because like, you know, when I was telling someone for the first time, it was like, I think my ex-boyfriend, and like, you know, my mum was the only other person I'd told. Then telling my boyfriend at the time and his response being like to laugh at me and use really awful words to describe me, and being like, well, like, that's me done. Like, never going to tell anyone, you know, again, because that's what they're going to think of me. And, you know, wanting to like kind of remove myself from that label, because like if I'm not disabled or living with a disability, if I'm still just me, then like I can achieve all the things I want to achieve.
Oh my God, yes. I remember. So when I was 15, I also had a similar negative experience with a boyfriend of mine at the time. And so after that, I was like, okay, no one can know that I have a disability. And so I remember my teacher being like, okay, so you're disabled. And I was like, excuse me, no, please don't say that. And he was like, what do you mean? And I was like, no, I just refer to it as a problem, because if it's a problem, it can just be overcome and it doesn't impact my life. And it's not like who I am. It's not a part of me. It's just something that I'm going to move on from.
Yeah.
You know, and so I just, literally, that's just how I then viewed my life. I didn't even tell any of my close friends.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that I told you was huge for me. I didn't let my mum or my dad or anyone tell anyone about my health. I was just so petrified about it. And then it was around the time that we were having these conversations about starting So You're Disabled that I started reading about it, about disability, and I came across these studies, and I found them to be super validating, because they asked these people, so there were studies were done in America, and they asked these people, how do you define disability? And every single person across multiple studies defined disability as having a negative and an unpleasant existence.
Wow, how validating.
Well, I mean, it was validating.
That was sarcasm.
Of course, but it was validating in the sense, right, that these people literally defined disabled people as not being independent, as having an impairment, as being abnormal.
Yeah.
So as soon as I read that, I was validated in understanding why I was petrified of anyone ever finding out about me living with a disability. But also then I was like, well, this makes so much sense then. This is the problem with society and with how people have been conditioned to think about disability, because they don't even realize how problematic and how harmful these responses are, because it's just so like ingrained in society to think of disability in this way.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even their fault, really, that they're responding like this.
No, it's so true, because like we don't have access to these conversations, like even as a community, like even within our own community, there are not necessarily these conversations that are easily accessible to everyone, where you can start to think about like, who am I? Through my own lens, like not what society says I am, not who like the people I tell think I am.
Well,
like,
the media says that I am.
Yeah, like just who am I? And like, you know, when you have these labels, it can kind of almost place you in a very restrictive box of who you are. And, you know, so you may have noticed, like at the start, like I say I'm disabled because that's how I identify. You know, I've had a big journey, and we will explore that more in a later episode. But like, I've had a whole journey about getting to that that stage and that place of being okay to identify that way. But like, it definitely didn't come like immediately when I got like that diagnosis in high school. And, you know, you identify as living with a disability. And so like, you know, you have these labels and then you're talking about it with someone and they've already made their minds up about like what that means for you and like who you are. And inherently there's some version of like pity or, you know, feeling like you're amazing if you do anything, or like, you know, but likewise, you're not good enough if you're not doing enough, and you're like not disabled enough, but like also, you know, you're kind of weird and I don't know how to respond to you, and like all this stuff. Like, it's so loaded.
Yeah, because I feel like people get super uncomfortable with talking about disability and like how to handle a disabled person. And you know, like with me, for example, when I tell people, oh, well, like actually I have a disability, because most of the time it's invisible, except for when I'm having some flare-ups where it is visible, they look at me and they're like, oh, but like you look so well. Like, what do you mean? Like, how can you be disabled? And then I have like two options, right? I either feel like I have to prove my disability to them, or I'm just kind of like, haha, like no problem. Because if I then prove it to them, they then often view me as being like lesser. And I think that's the problem. I think that's part of why we sort of started So You're Disabled, is to create this community for us, but also to help sort of be like, hey, what's going on with like the value of disabled people or people living with a disability in society? Like, why are we still allowing this to happen?
Yeah. And like also to acknowledge, I think, that there are many different experiences within our own community. Like, I
Definitely.
would never like purport to have the knowledge of every single like experience of disability. And nor would any like one like person with a disability or disabled person. Like, even the way we identify, like there's identifiers outside of the two that we have.
Absolutely.
And
disability, it's like, it's so unique. It's such a unique experience for every different person.
Yeah. And like, you know, like any community, there's like many different views and opinions and experiences that all shape your thoughts on things. So yeah, I mean, we're definitely not here to be like, this is the only way to like talk about disability.
Absolutely not. Like, we're just sharing our experiences and the ways in which it impacts us. But we would love to hear about you and your experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, that's what our Instagram, you know, has really started to become, like a safe space for like just having a discourse about these different experiences. And like, you know, we have had people at times like let us know like, hey, like that's not really, like that doesn't really fit with my experience. And that's fine. Like,
we want to hear that too.
Yeah. And like, you know, we expect that to happen because
Absolutely.
like it's normal that like you would have different experiences to the two of us. You know, we're just two people with sharing our own experiences, really.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, that conversation, going back to where we started, like that conversation that starts with, oh, so you're disabled. Like, you know, I then, especially when I think I start to talk about like what diagnoses I have, like that can then become its own very deficit-based, loaded conversation, because people then have an idea of you from what they've seen in the media of those disabilities. And it's like, oh, I don't know how to explain to you, like, that you have a very misguided, like, kind of view of what this means and, like, who I am as a result.
God. Literally, this experience is quite shared, although our disabilities are different. I remember very recently telling someone, because I'm trying to get more comfortable with it, and their response was literally my worst nightmare. They literally, because I told them like the diagnosis, and they literally were like, oh my God, like that's so bad, like that's so awful, like my neighbor has that and like she can't do anything and she's like about to die, like, oh my God, are you okay? Oh. And I was like, oh, Jesus, why did you just say that to me? But that's the thing, right? People make all of these assumptions that they don't understand that, you know, like even just like a diagnosis, right? It's just like a name. Like everyone's experience within that is so different and it impacts everyone so differently. And that's also why we've started this, to get like that message out there that it does impact everyone differently. But the one thing I will say that I feel like is a pretty shared experience is in people, any person living with any form of like disability or like lacking any, like anything, needing to cancel last minute. Like the amount of friends that I've lost because they just don't understand this. Even the ones that knew about my disability, like it's unfathomable to them that, you know, by last minute I'm too unwell to attend like something that is important to them. And by all means, like if it's important to my friend, it's important to me. But then think about how awful I feel in needing to cancel. Mm. And so I feel like this needs to be more normalized in society. You know, like it just needs to be much more normalized that people just sometimes really do have to cancel last minute.
Well, I think like, first of all, the difference in those experiences, like either you're about to die or like, you know, cancelling last minute is so terrible and you obviously don't value their friendship.
So you're a really bad friend.
So like they're almost opposites of each other, like those two things. That's wild. And like
so wild.
And like going back to that person who responded to you and was like, oh my God, that's so bad. Like these are the types of things where I'm like, maybe just take a minute when you're responding to someone sharing this information with you and think about how it might feel for them when you respond like, oh, that's awful. Like, that's really bad. Like,
you're about to die. Are you okay?
Because like, I think not only are we like viewed immediately as being different in like a negative way, but we're then also like on top of that, like, yeah, not okay. Like, you know, like, oh, that's really bad. Like,
yeah, like we're then subjected to all of these internalized assumptions people make about disability that aren't actually an accurate reflection of my experience of my disability or how I choose to view myself or, you know, want to live my life.
Yeah.
They're just making all of these assumptions based on what, you know, society or the media or like whatever it is has led to them to think this way about disability.
Yeah.
Being negative.
And then I think on top of that, you know, this other experience you have of like people, and I've had it too, getting upset with you for cancelling last minute and that somehow meaning you don't value them. I think that idea is very entrenched, right? Like that if you cancel last minute, then you don't value that person's time and you don't value that person like full stop. And I think that is a big thing that needs to shift.
Absolutely,
because
it does.
Without any nuance, like you are excluding people and you're like discriminating against people with disability and disabled people because you're not adding any nuance to that idea that like you know, they don't value you as a friend. When in reality, like, you know, if people could follow us around like for a day or a week or whatever, you know, you'd see just how much like we're doing and how much is going on and, you know, just like the inability to do it all is real. And like, you know, I put a lot of pressure on myself to like get it all done. And it's been challenging for me to shift that way of thinking and move more into like this thinking about my spoons and like reading about spoon theory definitely look into it if you don't know what I'm talking about. And like these concepts that really help me to like visualize, okay, I actually can't do all of this. So what am I going to do with the amount of energy I have? And like even being able to check in with myself, like how am I feeling? Like I would just keep going and going and going and going and going, then be exhausted and be like, this is weird. Why am I so exhausted? Strange.
I wonder.
And yeah, it's like, well, because I'm trying to do way too much. And why am I doing that? Because I never want anyone to perceive me negatively.
Yeah, it's really hard. Like the amount of things that I wish that I could do, but that I just can't do. But I mean, this is why we've started these conversations happening. And, you know, hopefully, eventually, people just start to realize that it's not so easy for us, and to help shift these like ingrained beliefs that everyone has.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's what we're doing. We're trying to create a safe space where people feel comfortable to share their experiences and also to learn from them. Like, you definitely don't have to have an experience of disability to be in our space. You definitely don't have to have an experience of disability to want to engage and reach out to us. But we're just trying to make conversations about these things more accessible to more people.
Absolutely. And like we said before, we really want to hear from you. So please definitely reach out, share your experiences with us. And we really hope to see you again next week, well, in a couple of weeks, for our second episode.
Yeah, well, we'll see you then. And in the meantime, we hope you have a good couple of weeks.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.